is a Countdown Bulletin podcast, the second of the day in the wake of the Potomac River crash. And now, Trump has insulted the dead. He has insulted those who died aboard American Eagle Flight 5342 and aboard the U.S. Army Black Hawk helicopter, which collided Wednesday night. That extraordinary insult in a moment. But perhaps worse yet, it turns out that within hours of Trump's insane insistence that the crash had something to do with diversity, equity, and inclusion, DEI, the dog whistle for pure, unabated racism, it did not have anything to do with DEI. It had more to do with the Department of Government Efficiency, DOGE. Air traffic control guiding both the passenger flight and the chopper as they approached National Airport in D.C. Wednesday night was reportedly understaffed, and instead of a controller in charge of flights and a second controller in charge of helicopters, the same person was doing both jobs simultaneously. If the philosophy of any individuals was at fault here, it was that of Trump and Elon Musk, and the rabid desire of impossibly and unnecessarily rich people to gain more money they could never live long enough to spend because of their hateful fear that some ordinary person somewhere has $1 that a billionaire will never get to steal from them. This wasn't DEI, it was DOGE. The New York Times has now reported that the disaster, and perhaps the forerunner of the trimming of the federal budget, not of fat, but of bone, life and death protections for this nation's citizens, took place in a context of chronic understaffing at National Airport. Quoting the first internal FAA report, Sydney Ember and Emily Steele of the Times quote that report as saying that the staffing at the air traffic control tower in D.C. was, quote, not normal for the day and volume of traffic. That quote is from the FAA report. The Times adds, quote, the controller who was handling helicopters in the airport's vicinity Wednesday night was also instructing planes that were landing and departing from its runways. Those jobs, the Times continues, typically are assigned to two controllers rather than one. This increases the workload for the air traffic controller and can complicate the job. One reason is that the controllers can use different radio frequencies to communicate with pilots flying planes and pilots flying helicopters. While the controller is communicating with pilots of the helicopter and the jet, the two sets of pilots may not be able to hear each other, unquote. It was, to fulfill the cliche, a disaster waiting to happen. And Wednesday night it happened. And it may have already been exacerbated by the mindless buyout offer Musk reportedly steamrolled through actual government officials, offering government employees, including air traffic controllers, cash to leave their jobs more or less immediately. The control tower at National Airport in Washington was already about one-third below staff needs as called for by both the controllers' union and the FAA. And 67 people, including several young girls just starting their figure skating careers, are dead because of it. And Trump exploited those deaths by associating them not with understaffing and insufficient government spending, but with DEI. It was also noted late Thursday that the same DEI regulations that Trump has railed about for months and since his inauguration almost without stopping for breath, those regulations have been in place since 2013, meaning that Trump served the entirety of his first term, and his acolytes and his sycophants and his cult members did not say anything about, did not do a thing to eliminate these supposedly disastrous guidelines, which are in fact present to protect against racism and sexism and white supremacism, like Trump's racism and sexism and white supremacism. And on the same score, the stumbling response to the tragedy from the Nepo hire now serving as Secretary of Transportation, Sean Duffy, the nondescript former congressman whose wife was one of Pete Hegseth's co-hosts on the Fox Weekend Morning Show, the man now leading the investigation into this disaster. Duffy, voted on the 2019 bill H.R. 267, the Transportation, Housing, and Urban Development and Related Agencies Appropriations Act. In English, funding for the FAA. Sean Duffy, in 2019, voted against funding the FAA. And then there is this continuing escalating crisis of Trump's self-awareness or lack of self-awareness of his insulting, arrogant, seemingly delusional reaction to the crash. This is wherein he insulted the dead. He insisted it was DEI. He insisted that it was a time for everyone to come together in shared grief. He insisted the controllers might have screwed up. He insisted that since he owns a helicopter, he knows the copter pilot could have avoided the accident. He then insisted he wasn't blaming anybody. And then he circled back to insisting that he already knew it was DEI and you, reporter, citizen, survivor of a victim, you just weren't as smart as he was. So you couldn't see the obviousness of what was in reality his irrational guess. He made that guess before the black box from the plane had even been located. And then in a situation that he had already made worse, impossibly worse, he somehow outdid himself. In the Oval Office, as Trump finally got around to appointing an acting FAA chief to replace the one Musk talked him into forcing out last week, Trump, late Thursday afternoon, did the almost unthinkable. He trivialized the healing rituals of mourning to which the grief-stricken will doubtless turn in the coming days, the visit to the crash site. You will hear, clearly, Trump mocking a reporter for asking him if he would visit the site, but towards the end, the reporter talks over Trump's answer, so what he says at the end is less clear. Listen carefully. He finishes with, "You tell me, what's the site? The water? You want me to go swimming?"
Do you have a plan to go visit the site or meet with any of the
I have a plan
responders?
to visit, not the site, because you tell me, what's the site? The water?
Or to meet with the first responder?
What's the site? The water? You want me to go swimming? There is no human being inside Donald Trump. There is no empathy. There is no sense that others matter for a moment. Not even the sense that even if it meant nothing to him, his presence might be, for some reason, of value to them. And behind even that minimal lowest bar of sympathy, something else has newly broken inside Trump. Even last year, even on the campaign, Trump could recognize the opportunity to exploit tragedy and grief for political purposes when that opportunity appeared before him. Extraordinarily, that skill now seems gone. Whatever is wrong with him, it has now erased his instinct to manipulate the grief of others, to recognize a good photo op when it appears before him. It is a new level of Trumpian inhuman behavior. What's the site? The water? You want me to go swimming? My answer to that depends, sir, on whether or not you can swim. The rest of this bulletin is a repeat of Wednesday afternoon's first update. If you've heard that already, feel free to hit stop right now. Thank you for listening. This is a Countdown Bulletin podcast. I'm Keith Olbermann, and in a news conference suggesting actual, virulent, uncontrolled madness and requiring his immediate removal under the terms of the 25th Amendment to the Constitution, the President of the United States of America insisted that a horrific tragedy that had occurred barely 14 hours earlier, that had claimed the lives of 64 passengers and crew, including at least 14 members of the American figure skating community, including 2 teenage champions and their coaches and their mothers, to say nothing of the deaths of 3 active serving U.S. military personnel in a helicopter. This nightmare excuse for a human being insisted this accident was caused by DEI. This is the President of the United States who forced out the head of the Federal Aviation Administration last week and did not bother to even appoint an acting FAA commissioner to succeed him until after they were already fishing the bodies out of the Potomac. This is the President of the United States who appointed not an idiot Fox News propagandist host to be Transportation Secretary, but rather appointed an idiot Fox News propagandist host's husband, a man who cannot successfully say the word pattern. He pronounces it pattern. This is the President of the United States who a week ago yesterday froze the hiring of new air traffic controllers, which had already been gutted by the Republican House and the previous Republican presidency, the quantity and quality of which has been in unchecked crisis since Ronald Reagan fired all 11,000 of this nation's air traffic controllers in 1981. But sure, it's DEI. Or as Trump's idiot lawyer Alina Habba called it last night on television in a malapropism with tragic implications, quote, DIE. It's DEI when they cannot confirm if the helicopter pilot actually gave control, confirmation that he saw the lights of the jet with which he collided, but was looking at the wrong jet or at the wrong lights, when they cannot even yet rule out hypotheticals, when they don't even know yet if either the plane or the helicopter had some kind of catastrophic mechanical failure, when they cannot figure out if communications somehow shorted out, or if any of 1,000 other possible tragedies unfolded, or if the Pentagon, Pete Hegseth's Pentagon, caused this by running a training mission at night in the middle of the approach to the busiest runway in the country. But Trump is certain because he's Trump, and he is a super genius, and he knows everything. And he already told you that. And he's always right. And he blamed it on DEI and Pete Buttigieg and Joe Biden, I guess because he's a super genius, but nobody told him that he has been president of the United States for 11 days now. And his people have been in charge for 11 days now. And if he thinks he gets a pass because they all just started only because they dragged their feet on the transition process in which nameless, faceless bureaucrats in the outgoing administration warn nameless, faceless bureaucrats in the incoming administration of the challenges and the crises and the fixes that were only mid-fix. This was the process Trump skipped. But Trump does not bother with details because he is materially brain damaged and evil and descending into some combination of senility and insanity, and because he long ago stopped processing the world around him. And if he hears 100 differing voices, it turns out they're all inside his world-threatening head.
Today, blamed the diversity elements, but then told us that you weren't sure that the controllers made any mistake. We then said perhaps the helicopter pilots were the ones who made the mistake.
It's all under investigation.
I understand that. That's why I'm trying to figure out how you can come to the conclusion right now that diversity had something to do with this crash.
Because I have common sense, okay? And unfortunately, a lot of people don't.
Of course, he does not have common sense. He does not have sense of any kind. That is the gist of this nightmare. That is the essence of this crisis. The studies of Professors Dunning and Kruger long ago established by asking participants how they thought they did on an exam compared to everybody else taking the same exam, that it really is true. The people who know the most and are the smartest will assume that there are others around them who know more or have studied harder, who at least know as much. The people who know the least, though, are convinced they literally know everything and no one else knows anything, that they, of course, finished first among the exam takers. On average, it turns out, with remarkable consistency, that those who think they have finished in the top quarter have almost invariably finished in the second to lowest quarter. It is called the Dunning-Kruger effect, and it has now reached its terminal, final, tragic, insolvable nadir in Donald Trump. I will add here that if you doubt the pervasiveness, the completeness of Trump's malfunctioning brain and malfunctioning personality, he conducted his news conference, having apparently had today or yesterday, and not realized it looked like this, having had yesterday or today, His eyebrows dyed a yellowish white, unlike any color he has ever previously dyed them. So startling that his face gave the appearance that his actual brows had been stolen, or perhaps had fallen victim to DEI. He did not notice, and no one could tell him. Would that it was all as stupid and embarrassing as that. Would that it stopped here. For at the same moment, Trump was explaining that he, with eyebrows that looked like the Joe Pesci character from the JFK movie, only white, knew what caused the crash. It was DEI. In fact, all that proves is that he has learned how to say DEI when others, like Alina Habba, didn't quite master it. While the news conference was ongoing, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. was on Capitol Hill, still unable to explain what Medicare Parts A, B, and C are, even though he was questioned about this exact same thing last week, and thus was given notice that this might come up on the exam, and he could have spent some 5-minute span in the last week and could have put his hands on a book rather than on his penis in front of a camera phone. Mr. Kennedy also again repeatedly denied things he has said and positions he has taken, and he insisted that blacks should get fewer vaccines than whites do. If Mr. Kennedy, the nominee to run Health and Human Services, really wants to improve health and provide human services in this country, he should look into donating his body to science. Perhaps later this week. And at the same time, these things were going on. Trump's nominee to ruin the FBI. I'm sorry, that was a typo. It's run the FBI. Oh, no, it is ruin the FBI. Trump's nominee at FBI was asked if he could say Joe Biden won the 2020 election. Just repeat those words. And Kash Patel literally could not and would not say them. Patel was also asked if he knew the fascist and white supremacist talk show host and podcaster Stu Peters, and he said, not off the top of my head, no. And Senator Dick Durbin then listed the 8 times Kash Patel had appeared on a webcast called The Stu Peters Show. And in front of a Senate committee, Trump's nominee to be Director of National Lack of Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, imploded when she was asked about a predicament only somebody as careless and arrogant and fundamentally stupid as she is could get themselves into. Were you aware, asked New Mexico Senator Martin Heinrich, that the Islamic cleric you met during your inexplicable 2017 trip to meet the leaders of the Assad dictatorship in Syria, were you aware that this cleric had threatened to activate a network of suicide bombers in the U.S. and Europe? Answer yes, and you are a traitor. Answer no, and you are a dangerous buffoon. And Gabbard answered, I was not, and I had not heard that until today. That Trump has filled his, quote, government, unquote, with legitimately, literally incompetent people is a tragedy on its own, the debris from which is still being taken out of the Potomac. But what multiplies this nightmare, what expands it beyond all proportion, what turns it and turns Trump into a clear and present danger to every person in this country and every person on this planet is that instead of the final line of defense against a team of morons being the proverbial president with the sign on the desk reading "The buck stops here," the final line of defense in this world today is this dangerous, arrogant, condescending, unstable, below-average intelligence monster whose metamorphosis into a candidate for institutionalization has now peaked with his latest, newest, strangest obsession, his conviction that the answer to any crisis, that the answer to any tragedy, that the response to any real human pain is to blame it on DEI. Donald Trump must be removed from office. Impeachment bills to be filed weekly until the minority party regains control of the House might work. No faster than 2 years from now. The 25th Amendment, providing for an emergency remedy for the exact inability to discharge the powers and duties of the presidency that Trump exhibited today, is the correct way to save this country. It is also I add with, I hope, gravity and not menace in my voice, it is also the easiest. This has been a Countdown Bulletin podcast. The next scheduled edition is Monday. I'm Keith Olbermann.